Revealed in the 2023 killings of a family in Romeoville.
Police are now saying a woman manipulated her boyfriend into believing he had to execute the family per orders of a Mexican cartel. 38-year-old Alberto Rolón and 32-year-old Zoraida Bartolome. Their 2 children and 3 dogs were fatally shot in their suburban home. Body-worn camera footage from the night of September 17, 2023 shows the moment police conducted a welfare check and discovered the bodies.
The living room lights glowed warmly inside the family home. Children's toys scattered across the carpet, the faint smell of dinner still hanging in the air. It was a place of safety, laughter, and life, until the front door creaked open. What followed wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, brutal, and deeply personal. The family never stood a chance. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a crime so vicious, it left even seasoned investigators struggling to understand how a love affair could ignite such devastating violence. How does someone who once claimed to be in love turn into the very thing that rips a family apart? Was it jealousy? Was it rage? Or something even more disturbing hiding underneath the surface? The betrayal that sparked this bloodbath wasn't just whispered in private. It had been simmering, feeding on broken promises and growing resentment. The stage was set. One man trapped between 2 lives, a mistress who refused to be forgotten, and a family whose only mistake was trusting the wrong person. Before we get deeper into this chilling story, tell us, where are you watching from? Have you ever heard of a situation where jealousy turns so deadly? Drop it in the comments. We're reading everyone. Because what happened next would leave neighbors terrified, the community scarred, and a courtroom stunned by the sheer cruelty on display. And the most chilling part? This wasn't a crime of sudden rage. It was a plan, raw, furious, and unstoppable, set into motion long before the first scream shattered the night. Stay with us, because the betrayal you're about to hear didn't just end in heartbreak. It ended in cold-blooded slaughter and a chilling trail of devastation no one could erase. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers around the world. At the heart of this tragedy stood a man named Lamont Thompson. A husband, a father, and by all outward appearances, a pillar of his community. Lamont was in his mid-30s, known for his broad smile and easy laugh. By day, he worked steadily at a local manufacturing plant, earning the respect of coworkers for being dependable and level-headed. In a small town where everybody knew everybody, Lamont's reputation was solid. He wasn't flashy or loud. He was the man who'd wave hello when you passed him at the grocery store, the father who never missed his son's basketball games, and the neighbor who'd shovel your driveway without being asked. But reputation is a thin sheet over a man's private life. And behind Lamont's warm public persona, there was a growing fracture he couldn't hide forever. Lamont had been married to Tamara "Tam" Richardson Thompson for nearly a decade. Together, they were raising 2 young children, 8-year-old Marcus and 5-year-old Mia. Tam, a bright and ambitious woman, had been the emotional anchor of their family. She worked part-time at a local clinic and juggled motherhood with grace. Friends described Tam as lively, compassionate, and endlessly devoted to her family. Their home life, at least to the outside world, looked like a picture-perfect example of the American dream. Birthday parties, Sunday barbecues, Little League trophies displayed proudly on the mantle. But appearances, especially in matters of the heart, are often deceiving. Enter Tisha Moore, the woman who would forever shatter their lives. Tisha, a 29-year-old single mother herself, met Lamont through mutual friends. What started as flirtatious banter at a neighborhood gathering quickly grew into something much more dangerous. Tisha, unlike Tam, carried a wildness about her. She was fiercely independent, but privately battled with insecurity and abandonment issues. Friends close to Tisha said she longed for stability, craved validation, and clung tightly to anyone who offered her the promise of a better life. Lamont represented that promise. At first, it was just late-night texts, secret phone calls, stolen afternoons. Lamont gave Tisha attention and affection she hadn't felt in years. And Tisha, desperate to build a future beyond her struggles, convinced herself that what they shared was more than a fling, it was destiny. But Lamont had no real intention of leaving his wife. To him, the affair was an escape, a reckless, selfish pursuit he thought he could control. He underestimated how deeply Keisha believed in their future together. While Lamont maintained the charade of the devoted husband at home, Keisha was growing restless. Every anniversary post Tam put online, every family picture she shared fueled Keisha's bitterness. She felt sidelined, disposable. A dirty little secret. In her mind, Tam wasn't just Lamont's wife. She was the obstacle keeping Keisha from the life she deserved. The more Lamont pulled back, the more unhinged Keisha became. And somewhere in the tangled, toxic web of lies, resentment, and broken promises, the seed of deadly vengeance was planted. Meanwhile, Tam lived blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb threatening her family. She continued planning birthday parties, helping Marcus with his homework, tucking Mia into bed at night. She was the kind of mother who volunteered at school events and stayed up late baking cupcakes for classroom parties. She trusted Lamont. She believed in their life together. She had no idea that her husband's choices had placed a target on her back. The children, Marcus and Mia, were the epitome of innocence, caught in the crossfire of a twisted love triangle they had no part in creating. Their world was supposed to be one of storybooks and skinned knees, bedtime prayers and playground adventures. But fate had something darker in store. Keisha, fueled by betrayal and consumed by rage, no longer saw Tam and the children as real people. They became symbols of everything she had been denied. In her mind, their removal wasn't just justified, it was necessary. This wasn't a sudden breakdown. It was a slow, smoldering collapse. Each ignored call, each missed promise, each loving post Lamont shared with his wife chipped away at Keisha's sanity until, eventually, something inside her snapped. One decision, one night, one unspeakable act. The happy facade that Tam worked so hard to protect was about to come crashing down, in a storm of violence no one could have imagined. And by the time the truth came out, the town would be left asking, how did no one see the danger creeping closer, until it was too late? Lamont was careful at first. He promised himself, and Keisha, that they would be smart, cautious. But emotions don't follow rules, and Keisha's feelings didn't stay small. With every stolen encounter, she fell deeper. She started to imagine a future where it was just the two of them, no secrets, no hiding. A future where she wasn't the outsider, but the one Lamont came home to every night. Keisha wasn't content with moments snatched in the shadows. She wanted all of him, and she made sure he knew it. At first, Keisha's demands were subtle. She would jokingly ask, "When are you going to tell her?" Lamont would laugh it off, kiss her forehead, make vague promises about soon. But as months dragged on, Keisha grew bolder and less willing to accept excuses. Every broken promise, every anniversary post celebrating his marriage felt like a slap in the face. Keisha would call, leave voicemails that started out tearful and ended in rage. She threatened to show up at his house. She hinted at telling Tam everything. Lamont panicked. He pleaded with Keisha to be patient, to just give him time. He told her he loved her. He swore he would leave his wife. But it was always next week, next month, after the holidays, after the kids' birthdays. Promises stacked on top of promises until they meant nothing at all. And Keisha began to realize she wasn't his future. She was his escape. Psychological cracks began to split open inside her. Friends noticed she became more isolated, more volatile. The confident, flirty woman who once turned heads now carried a simmering anger just beneath the surface. Every time she saw Tam's smiling face online, every time she saw a picture of Lamont playing happily with his kids, it was like gasoline poured onto a fire she could no longer control. Keisha began showing up uninvited. At his workplace, at places she knew he would be without Tam. Once, she sat parked outside his home for hours, watching the lights inside flicker on and off, imagining the life she had been denied. She told herself she had been lied to, used, humiliated. And humiliation, for someone like Keisha, felt unbearable. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about power, about taking back control of a situation where she had been made to feel invisible. And Lamont, despite the growing storm gathering around him, continued to believe he could manage it. He thought if he distanced himself slowly enough, she would eventually move on. That the crisis would fade like a bad memory. He was wrong. So very wrong. Because by now, Keisha wasn't asking for Lamont's love anymore. She was demanding it. She wanted everything she had been promised, or she would make sure no one else got to keep it either. There were no more gentle conversations, no more tearful pleas, only threats, only ultimatums. Lamont was trapped. Keisha had given him a choice, and neither option ended well. The emotional powder keg they had built together was about to explode, and when it did, it would leave nothing but ashes in its wake. Because for Keisha, waiting was over, and her idea of justice would soon turn deadly. The turning point came on a quiet Tuesday night. Lamont met Keisha at the usual spot, a cheap motel on the edge of town where they had spent countless secret hours. But this meeting wasn't like the others. There was no laughter, no tender moments. Keisha sat stiffly on the bed, arms folded across her chest, her eyes burning holes through him. She asked, for the last time, when he was going to leave Tam. She didn't want excuses. She wanted a date, a real plan, a commitment that said he was choosing her, not hiding her. Lamont shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, and then he told her what she had feared all along. He wasn't going to leave his wife. Not now. Not ever. He spoke carefully, trying to cushion the blow. He said he loved his family, that he had made mistakes, that he needed to fix things at home, that their relationship had been a distraction, something he couldn't afford anymore. In that moment, something inside Keisha snapped. The humiliation was instant and complete. She felt discarded, cheap, lied to. Every stolen kiss, every whispered promise, it all turned to poison in her mouth. Keisha didn't cry, she didn't scream. She sat there, staring at Lamont, memorizing every word he said. And inside her, a dark, new resolve began to grow. Lamont left the motel thinking it was over. Messy, painful, but over. He had no idea that Keisha had already begun plotting what would happen next. In the days that followed, Keisha's behavior shifted from desperate to dangerous. She started following Lamont, sitting in her car across the street from his house for hours at a time, engine idling in the dark, watching his every move, taking pictures, keeping notes. She sent cryptic text messages late at night, short sentences, threats without context. You won't get away with this. You'll see what you've done to me. If I can't have you, no one will. At first, Lamont brushed it off. He told himself she was hurt, lashing out. She would cool off. It would pass. But Keisha's anger didn't cool. It boiled hotter. She began calling Tam's work, hanging up as soon as she answered. She posted vague, menacing comments on social media, never using names, but the meaning was clear enough to anyone who knew the players involved. Friends tried to intervene. A few people close to Keisha noticed the obsession overtaking her. They urged her to move on, to let it go, to find someone new. But by then, Keisha didn't want a new life. She wanted revenge. She began buying supplies, gloves, bleach, a large kitchen knife, quietly, carefully, as if preparing for an ordinary chore. No one knew how far gone she was. No one realized the storm that had been gathering wasn't just a threat, it was an inevitability. Lamont started noticing odd things, small warnings he didn't take seriously enough. A car tailing him home from work, anonymous notes left on his windshield, Tam mentioning that she felt like someone had been watching the house. Still, Lamont didn't go to the police. He thought it would make things worse. He thought he could handle it. He thought Keisha was just venting her hurt in ugly, toxic ways. He didn't see the full horror taking shape. Not yet. Meanwhile, inside her apartment, Keisha replayed every lie, every broken promise, over and over until it was the only reality she could see. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was enraged. Keisha convinced herself that Lamont had taken something from her. Years she would never get back, happiness she would never have. And in her mind, only one thing could balance the scale. Everyone he loved would have to pay. The fuse had been lit, the countdown had begun, and soon, a once-loving home would become a crime scene that would haunt the entire community for years to come. The Jackson family home, usually full of laughter, television noise, bedtime arguments, had gone still for the night. Lamont was asleep upstairs next to Tam. Their two young sons were tucked into their beds, lost in dreams. Keisha knew the house layout well. She had driven by it enough times, memorized its rhythms. She also knew that Lamont, believing the worst was behind him, had started leaving the back patio door unlocked. It took less than 5 seconds for her to slip inside. No broken windows, no forced entry, no alarms, just silence and purpose. She moved through the kitchen like a shadow, the knife wrapped tight in her hand. Her breath came slow and steady, rehearsed. This wasn't a crime of passion anymore. This was mission, obsession, revenge in its purest, ugliest form. The first target was Tam. Keisha crept up the stairs, the old wood groaning faintly under her weight. She pushed the master bedroom door open, inch by inch. Lamont stirred once, half opening his eyes, but before he could make sense of the figure looming in the darkness, Keisha was already upon them. The first strike was savage, then another, and another. Lamont tried to fight back, but Keisha's rage gave her the strength of 10 people. Tam barely had time to scream before she collapsed under the frenzy of blows. The boys woke up to the chaos, the sounds of their mother's desperate, gurgled cries, the heavy thuds of struggle. One of the boys, just 8 years old, stepped into the hallway, rubbing his eyes, confused, and Keisha saw him. Witnesses later said the neighbors heard a child's terrified scream, high, sharp, cut short far too quickly. Keisha's rampage didn't end with Lamont and Tam. She went after the boys too. No mercy, no hesitation. By the time the house fell silent again, 4 lives had been destroyed, and Keisha stood drenched in blood, surveying the wreckage she had created. She didn't run. Not right away. Instead, Keisha wandered through the house, opening cabinets, knocking over family photos, stepping over bodies as if in a trance. Finally, sometime before dawn, she slipped out the back door the same way she had come in. The horror wasn't discovered until early morning, when a concerned coworker called the house after Tam failed to show up for work. Something completely out of character. When no one answered, the coworker called 911. Police arrived to a scene so brutal that several officers had to step outside to compose themselves. Inside the home, they found Lamont and Tam lifeless in the master bedroom. The boys' bodies were discovered just outside their rooms, one still clutching his favorite stuffed animal. Neighbors, drawn outside by flashing lights and sirens, stood in stunned silence. Some wept openly. Others simply stared, unable to process the unimaginable tragedy unfolding next door. None of them had heard enough during the night to understand what had happened. A few mentioned faint sounds, a child's scream, a thud, but nothing that had triggered a call for help. For a time, investigators were baffled. No forced entry, no clear motive, no obvious suspect. But Keisha had made a mistake, a devastating one. In her madness, she had left behind 2 critical clues. First, bloody footprints near the back patio door matched a rare brand of sneakers. Sneakers Keisha had been seen wearing in social media photos. Second, and even more damning, in her haste, she had dropped a cheap locket near the stairs. A locket Lamont had given her during their affair, engraved with their initials hidden inside. When investigators found it, the story began to crack wide open. Friends came forward, describing Keisha's obsessive behavior, her stalking, her threats. Phone records showed dozens of calls and text messages in the weeks leading up to the murders. It wasn't long before they knocked on her door. Keisha answered, calm, almost indifferent, wearing the same sneakers that had left tracks through the blood of the family she destroyed. Under questioning, she broke down quickly, swinging wildly between fury, sobs, and eerie moments of cold clarity. She admitted to everything, not out of remorse, but because, in her mind, she had simply evened the score. There was one final, gut-wrenching revelation. Lamont hadn't died immediately. Forensic analysis showed he had survived for several minutes after the attack, dragging himself toward his son's rooms, trying to protect them even as his life ebbed away. He died just feet from their doors, fighting to the very end. Keisha White was arrested less than 48 hours after the murders. When police arrived at her apartment, she didn't resist. She opened the door wearing pajama pants and an old sweatshirt, her face blank, her eyes empty. There were no tears, no frantic denials. Inside her home, detectives found a trove of chilling evidence. Stacks of handwritten letters, never sent, filled with rage, jealousy, and violent fantasies about Tam and the children. Text messages saved in her phone showed a rapid descent from pleading to threats in the weeks before the murders. And perhaps most disturbing of all, a diary hidden inside her nightstand, where Keisha documented her growing hatred toward the Jackson family in excruciating detail. One entry, dated just days before the killings, read, "If he won't make a choice, I'll make it for him. They took my happiness, I'll take theirs." News of the arrests hit the community like a bombshell. Families who had lived near Lamont and Tam for years stood outside the Jackson house, weeping, leaving candles, teddy bears, handwritten notes. The media descended almost instantly. National headlines screamed about the Love Triangle massacre and the mistress of death. Photos of Keisha, Lamont, Tam, and their children splashed across every television screen, every front page. Speculation raged. How could no one have seen this coming? Could it have been prevented? What kind of person targets innocent children in a crime of passion? Keisha's behavior during the early court hearings fueled public fury even further. In the first appearance, she barely acknowledged the judge, slouched in her chair, staring off into space. At one point, she even smiled faintly when prosecutors described the brutality of the killings. That image, the faint, chilling smirk, would haunt the public's memory for years to come. At trial, Keisha's defense team argued mental instability. They painted her as a woman broken by years of manipulation, false promises, and emotional abuse. They claimed she lost touch with reality, believing the only way to stop the pain was through destruction. But the prosecution dismantled that narrative piece by piece. They presented the diary. They introduced the text messages showing planning, patience, intent. They revealed that Keisha had bought new gloves and a change of clothes just days before the attack, indicating cold forethought, not temporary insanity. Several of Tam's family members took the stand, their grief raw and unfiltered. Tam's sister sobbed as she described helping her niece and nephew pick out Halloween costumes just a week before they were murdered. Lamont's mother, barely able to speak through her anguish, told the jury about a birthday party planned for the boys that would now never happen. There were no dry eyes in the courtroom. Even seasoned reporters covering the trial struggled to maintain composure. In a surprise move, Keisha chose to testify on her own behalf. Under cross-examination, she admitted everything, but refused to express genuine remorse. "I loved him," she said flatly. "I hated her. I hated all of them." The chilling lack of humanity in her voice sealed her fate. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. During sentencing, the judge spared no words. He called her actions monstrous, calculated cruelty beyond reason, and the obliteration of an entire family out of pure selfishness. Keisha was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted, not with cheers, but with tears. Families clutched each other, strangers embraced. A community that had lived in fear, anger, and heartbreak for months finally had an answer, if not true healing. Outside the courthouse, hundreds gathered for a candlelight vigil. They spoke not of the killer, but of Tam's kindness. Lamont's laughter, the boys' bright futures, stolen too soon. To this day, their old house stands as a reminder of what was lost. A place where tricycles once rolled down the driveway, where life once bustled with joy and noise, now silent forever. The aftermath of the Jackson family tragedy, painful questions remained. How could something so catastrophic have been allowed to fester? Were there warnings no one recognized, or simply no one wanted to see? Patterns in crimes of passion are disturbingly consistent. They rarely ignite out of nowhere. More often, they simmer. Quiet threats, emotional manipulation, increasingly desperate behavior. Unchecked, obsession can ferment into something deadly. Keisha White's descent followed a path seen too often. What started as forbidden affection escalated to entitlement. Her demands grew louder, promises for a new life, a future that existed only in her mind. When those promises crumbled, the fury that followed was not spontaneous. It was the final stage of a long, slow breakdown. There were warning signs, desperate texts sent at all hours, sudden appearances near Tam's workplace, vague but menacing statements made to coworkers about people needing to be taught a lesson. Each of these moments, when viewed separately, seemed small. Together, they painted a terrifying portrait of obsession spinning toward disaster. Too often, society dismisses emotional volatility, labeling it dramatic, over-emotional, or someone going through a hard time. But when jealousy becomes possessiveness, when heartbreak turns into veiled threats, the danger is real. Obsession blurs reality. It erases empathy. It breeds the belief that others are obstacles rather than human beings. In Keisha's mind, Tam and the children weren't innocents. They were symbols of what she couldn't have. And in crimes of passion, That shift in perception is often the final trigger. In today's world, the tragic reality is that emotional volatility, when combined with easy access to victims, can be catastrophic. We don't like to think about it. We don't want to imagine that love, jealousy, and rage can combust so violently within ordinary homes. But time and again, these stories remind us, ignoring red flags can be fatal. Recognizing escalating obsession isn't just about gut feelings, it's about paying attention to behavior. Repeated boundary violations, increasingly aggressive demands for attention, attempts to isolate the person from their family, threats masked as jokes or passionate declarations. Threats, no matter how exaggerated they seem, deserve to be taken seriously. The instinct to minimize them, to hope they'll just move on or cool down, can be a deadly mistake. In the Jackson case, perhaps intervention might have changed the outcome, perhaps a restraining order, perhaps a firm and public severing of ties combined with police documentation, perhaps mental health support earlier in the spiral, or perhaps nothing could have stopped a person so determined to destroy what she couldn't possess. We'll never truly know. What we do know is this: silence in the face of obsession is dangerous. Minimizing, excusing, or ignoring obsessive behavior leaves potential victims vulnerable. Addressing it early, with seriousness and action, could mean the difference between life and death. There's also a broader reflection to be made. Crimes like these expose the undercurrents of emotional instability that often go untreated, and how personal relationships, when corrupted by control and desperation, can ignite into violence. As a society, recognizing emotional volatility as a real threat, not just a personal issue, is critical. Because even though love can be healing, when twisted by obsession, it can also destroy. Do you think warning signs could have prevented this tragedy? Let us know in the comments. Your thoughts matter, because open conversations could save lives. Because Keisha White's story isn't the only one. There are other cases, even more disturbing, where obsession didn't stop at one victim. It spread like wildfire, taking down entire communities. And in our next video, we're digging into a case so twisted, it shocked even hardened detectives. You won't want to miss it.